Well, hi, everybody. Um, Thank you for joining us today. Welcome. Hopefully, you're in the right place. I want to welcome you to our discussion today for securing flexibility, aligning IT and security for a thriving everywhere workplace environment. I'm Karina Fulton. I'm the Vice President of Solutions Marketing at Ivanti, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today, and along with a number of my colleagues who I'm going to introduce in just a moment. Before we do that, though, let me share with you some basic housekeeping in case you're not familiar with the Goldcast platform, which is what we're actually using for this discussion today. On the right hand of your screen, you'll see a Q&A section where you can submit questions that we will answer at the end of the session. You can also explore a number of resources that we've made available for you. You'll find those in the docs section. There's also a chat on the right that you could communicate with other participants in case you want to. And with that, it's a really easy platform. There's really nothing else to share with you. So I am going to introduce my colleagues. I would like to welcome you to a fantastic group of experienced technologists. Collectively, this group of people here has more than a century's worth of experience in the tech space, and that is really saying something. So I'd like to introduce you to four fantastic product marketers with a vast array of experience in the technology space across IT and security. I'm just going to go from my left to right. And so first off is Angelica Villarreal. She and her team are focused primarily on our network security space. Next, I have Rob Lesueur. And Rob leads the team that is focused on the evolving exposure management space. And then I'm pleased to introduce Marika Fondufe. Marika leads up our IT, our endpoint management and security focus. And then last but not least, I've got Phil Bowermaster, who focuses on all things enterprise service management with his team. So we bring a lot of different perspectives together, and we're going to use those to hopefully lead a lively discussion today about everywhere work and what that means for IT and security organizations. I don't know that all of you have actually seen the Everywhere Workplace report. I'm not going to make the assumption there. You can certainly access it after. It is included in the resources that we have. But this is a research report that Ivanti conducts annually, and we survey globally about 8,000 IT and security professionals. And every year we take this data that comes back to us, analyze it for different trends, and then publish that out. And so there's a great set of interactive content on our website, as well as on the downloadable aspects of the report as well. But the goal around the workplace report really is to follow the trends around what has been known as everywhere work, and what I often refer to through the evolution of the pandemic until now as hybrid work. The focus of work in general, or the nature of work, has really changed since the pandemic started. And when it first started, we really focused on the location, where people were actually working, and whether that was at home or in the office. The concept of everywhere or hybrid work really has changed focus in recent years, and has really focused much more on what the work itself is and how that work is conducted. Because the reality is that the norm now is that people can work from anywhere, and that there is really going to be hybrid as the new norm. It's not, it isn't even really the new norm. It is just the norm now. And so the focus becomes on how do organizations actually enable the efficiency and productivity needed by all employees, regardless of where they're working, and at the same time, making sure that they're doing so in a way that reduces risk and provides security to their organization as a whole. there has been moves of certain organizations that we've all seen in the news where they're, really focused on getting people back into the office. We do continue to see that though as the minority, and we got that feedback as well through this report. The hybrid also has become much more, I think, a way to encompass the different types of workers that we have and the work that they're doing. Great example of that are those in the healthcare industry, where you might have clinicians that are moving from one practice to another. They have devices that are going on that journey from practice to practice with them. There needs to be a way to manage both their access to the company resources that they need, to those devices, and to the data as well. And so that focus on those frontline or mobile workers becomes a much more integral part of that hybrid work experience as well. Again, not just about the location, but about people actually how they conduct work. The flexibility that's needed by employees now, and that is expected, it provides an opportunity for organizations to actually optimize the efficiency and productivity that they get out of their employee base as a whole. But one of the challenges that has come with that is how they do that while actually maintaining a high level of security. And so that dichotomy between wanting to enable employees from wherever they are to really drive the business objectives and the need to make sure that that's done so in a secure fashion is really the crux of what we're going to talk about today. And let's see, with that, I think we'll actually start the more interactive part of this discussion today and get my colleagues involved. So first off, I want to start with a question, again, as we've been talking about, risks here and how it is, the way that people work now, the risks that are introduced into the organization. I want to start with a question for the panel. And let's talk about thinking about security risks from personal devices and the public networks and the strategies that IT and security can adopt to actually manage these risks effectively. And so to start off the conversation, I'm going to pass it over to Angelica.
Thanks, Karina. It's really no surprise that more and more organizations, they've either already shifted or they plan to shift to the hybrid work model that you mentioned earlier today. And really employees need, and actually they expect, let's just be very clear, they expect some level of flexibility in terms of how they access, whether it's the business applications or maybe critical data or just tools that they need to perform their jobs effectively. The reality is, and you can see from this chart here, employees have no qualms about using whatever convenient technology that's at their disposal, right? So whether it's a personal, like a mobile device or a hotspot or public Wi-Fi, or to your point earlier, approved mobile devices when you're talking clinics to clinics, right? But by doing so, they are introducing risks to the business. There's no way around that. And so from what kind of strategies an organization can implement, one of the number one priorities here is organizations need to empower their employees to efficiently work remotely. And now that's a very broad statement to make here, but it is really kind of the critical crux of what can effectively enable their employees to do their roles, right? And really what's required here is IT and security teams, they really need to work together to implement those solutions that can enable the secure access to those resources that I mentioned before. And this can be done with a series of technologies, right? We're not going to talk product here, but as an example, it can be endpoint technologies. It can be, network security solutions like VPN, which are near and dear to my heart. But really, it's about providing a secure remote environment by ensuring all the users undergo kind of the necessary security checks and requirements before they get access to that information. It's all about managing kind of the control and even who can access some of those critical applications. And it's really what's kind of those fine-grained policies that all users that get implemented across security and IT to control access based on identity or devices and even location, as you mentioned earlier today. Some organizations may choose to deploy least privilege access, right? So that employees are only granted the access that they need based on what's required to perform their job duties and nothing more, right? To help minimize the risk that could be introduced into the business. It's really about empowering employees to work effectively while simultaneously reducing the risk for the organization. Now, it does require that strong collaboration between IT and security teams because it directly aligns with the business objectives, maybe even the strategic priorities, and ultimately the identification of the technologies that are needed to support those strategies.
I think that's so interesting what you said, Angelica, and I'm going to pass it over to Marika to respond. And I think one of the things that, again, teams need to really be thinking about is while they absolutely need to secure access to the company resources, they need to do so without deprecating the employee's experience as well. So it really is a challenge holistically across security and IT teams that they face. So Marika, I'd love to get your perspective on this as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. IT and security must adapt kind of strategies that really allow, like Angelica was saying, empower the employees to really succeed in and out of the office, right? We need to really effectively kind of wrangle the devices, the networks and everything. And it means that you need to manage and secure your devices that you're using to be productive. The users, no matter where they're kind of logging on, from which location they're going to access the network and the information, right? And protecting most of all also all the corporate and organizational data in the process as well. So automated kind of endpoint management kind of technologies or kind of modern device management kind of help tackle the management aspect and the security challenge there, because you're able to kind of control these growing fleets of endpoints that really are often going out of control, that you're trying to rein in and really understand who's accessing what in which capacity and so on. So this gives that IT and security teams, like we're talking about, more of that control to secure and enforce these policies and these configurations and the access that we just talked about to software on the devices that we use regularly to perform our jobs, whether those are smartphones, tablets, and other types of endpoints, right? And while the issue of like personal device and public networks often applies to individual knowledge workers like all of us here, right? I really want to shift again to the conversation, Karina, that you mentioned about the frontline worker needs, right? Whether it's the nurses that you mentioned, whether it's retail workers or restaurant service, they really require that kind of mobile first approach, right? They're always on the move, and we need to kind of provide to them real-time access to information in a secure manner, simplified workflows that they can kind of conduct their work from everywhere, and it's in optimizing their productivity and also their efficiency. So whether that is, like you were saying, a nurse accessing patient records on a mobile device to review medical history, or a retail worker that's trying to use a mobile app to kind of check inventory, right? Or conduct like sales transactions. Or recently, I had actually that experience that I needed to kind of sign a contract, and a notary actually came to my house and had a whole mobile office in their place. They had the contract on their mobile phone, they had their stamp, they even had a mobile printer, which was new for me to actually see. But it's more the norm, right? And that transaction took maybe 10 minutes and off they went to the next client. So we have to be able to kind of provide that seamless process to allow workers to get their job done without being kind of restrained by these type of controls that we do need in place from an IT and security perspective. So some of these strategies Angelica already mentioned, but it's really, you need to kind of enforce also certain device restrictions and need to do that in a way that doesn't impact the flexibility or productivity. So there are options from a management approach to disabling, for instance, camera and microphone, restricting Wi-Fi options and as such. So that kind of will allow that frontline line workers could could stay productive, but we can really protect the applications and devices from unsafe kind of user behavior, such as accessing potentially compromised networks. Another option, like we also talked about, is the policies that we can kind of provide that grants that secure access based on context of the device, the user, where they are, which location they are, what network they're accessing, what application they're trying to access. So again, in that example I mentioned about the notary, they can quickly access and update work orders in the field without kind of returning to the office, again, improving that efficiency on that side. So those are kind of some of these strategies we have that can be looked at from IT and security when we're looking at managing and securing your devices that you're using for productivity. But Rob, what are your thoughts maybe on that, of how you would kind of balance that flexibility and the control?
Yeah, and I think, carrying on, the next logical extension to this, and actually I think it's important to set policy, to set expectations, and by that means before you actually start looking even at enforcement. But you have to look at that as prerequisite to be able to manage these things. So understanding what does the company want to allow or disallow in order to actually be able to instantiate some of the things that you and Angelica are talking about. And I think that first step is to have a business conversation that's going to align on what the organization's risk appetite is. Risk appetite being that, weighing the benefits of extending this remote access to software or to data, and looking at that versus the risk of doing so, because you're largely in an uncontrolled environment. So you have some tools that allow you to place some controls, things like VPNs, but some of that's going to be out of the control of IT and out of control of security teams. So you have to understand, what is that risk reward discussion, because you're making trade-offs, and those are reasonable business trade-offs to get the benefit of providing that remote access. You're getting something as a business, and so you're going to give up a little bit of risk exposure to do that. So you have to look at, is it worth allowing access to a particular corporate resource? And, what's the worst case scenario for that if it goes sideways? How do you mitigate against those associated risks? So it's about moving away from trying to eliminate risk to actually harnessing it for the good of the business. So I think you have to take what y'all are saying and get granular about it, that even within a class of assets like, let's say, laptops, does everyone get to use their laptop in the same way? Probably going to want to look at what kinds of data do certain classes of users get to work on remotely, under what conditions, and that type of thing. And then you can start applying tools like mobile device management, for example, to help balance that equation. But you can't really use those tools effectively without having a policy that's understood at the highest levels of the organization, and then turn around and start monitoring, compliance to the policies by using these tools. And again, you need to set expectations within the organization. You got to ground it in written policy, and you have to have ongoing conversations with employees to help them understand what the policies are that are in place, what the tools are that are being used to manage it. And because there's always going to be loopholes for hackers, is to inform them of what to look for. That something that the tool's not inherently going to do for you, but the end user should be aware of what those potential hacks look like. Stay vigilant, follow established policies. And, clearly communicating that, doing regular updates, and that way people who are the largest target of attacks understand what their role is in all of this. Talked earlier about, touching on zero trust as an example. This is a perfect place to apply that framework, that, just because you're part of, let's say, the marketing team or the sales team doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get access to all the same resources under all the same conditions. So that's really important, to start getting more granular, having that conversation at the highest levels of the organization, and implementing a layered approach to this, where you have the tools to be able to pull that off. So you're not just using, for example, a VPN, but you're layering, again, with something like mobile device management to have defense and depth on this. And I think if you set those policies and you're using the right tools, you're fostering a culture of vigilance, you can manage that risk to a place that you're comfortable with as an organization so you can get the benefits of that remote IT, and you can balance that against any potential risk threats.
I think you brought a great perspective to this, Rob, really in thinking about, the business as a whole and what the business is comfortable with, and coming to terms and making that agreement and then managing to that accepted level. So whether you are doing this through network access or through endpoint management, the way that you're actually empowering the organization, it is in alignment with, the level of risk that the organization is willing to take. So I think that's super interesting in terms of one of the tools people can use is actually more of a process or alignment that needs to happen first. All right, well, let's move on to a new topic and forward here. One of the other pieces of data that we got from our actual survey and the report that we published was really around what the world of hybrid work, what it means for employees and what it means for IT and security, in the way that it actually increases the workload for the IT and security teams who are trying to support this global hybrid, often mobile workforce. And I know, one of the things that is so important to every organization out there is that they are retaining and creating really good experiences for their employees. And we have seen increases in the levels of burnout, especially within IT and security teams, because of what this new paradigm around servicing a hybrid environment actually means. So I think that's one of the areas that I'd like to discuss now is, how do IT and security actually collaborate so that each team is able to support each other in servicing the entire employee base in this type of a new paradigm shift. So Phil, I'd love to start with you on this question, knowing that your background is service management.
Well, it's fun when you look at these, you think, well, if you got a burnout situation going on, if things have gotten bad enough, if all else fails, maybe we can work together, right? Maybe collaboration would be the solution. And I would focus in on one of these data points in particular, this 56% increase in help desk ticket volumes due to remote work. This is a good one, I think, because not only is it like you immediately look at that and go, whoa, something has gone terribly wrong. But it also, I think, really highlights sort of a key cultural difference between IT and security. Because as I said, any of us look at that and we go, well, something's gone terribly wrong. But from an IT standpoint, an increase in tickets isn't wholly negative. It's not completely negative, not entirely. Definitely, you got a lot more work to do, and that's not great. But there is a positive side to it. There is hey, looks like more problems are being identified. And since we don't just track the number of tickets that are being issued, we look at things like mean time to resolution. We're gonna see how well we're doing on that. We've got other things to look at besides just the ticket count, and we can go up. We solved that one. We solved that one. We solved that one. So there's this we're the heroes positive spin that IT can put on a lot of issues like those coming up. And I think that sounds really almost kind of Pollyannish, but there is a grain of truth to that. When you introduce a hybrid work environment and suddenly the number of help desk incidents skyrockets, partly, yes, that's because all the stuff Marika was talking about earlier is suddenly coming into focus, and you've got to deal with different connections and all these new devices and all these different locations, and you're supporting so much more than you were supporting before. But one of the things that happened there when you switched to hybrid was some people who had never logged a ticket ever, they had gone their whole life without ever logging an IT ticket. They suddenly log one, right? And the great thing about doing that is once you've done one, it gets a lot easier, right? So suddenly we're all in the business of logging IT tickets. So there actually is an aspect of, yep, we're getting a better focus on this. We're getting more control on this, and we're able to really see what we're doing better. That's the IT view. Security, I think, is never going to look at, for example, the number of security incidents shooting through the roof as anything other than that's a bad thing. That's something has gone wrong. There's not a lot of silver linings on having a huge increase in security incidents, and that's because they come about it from a focus on incidents rather than resolving them and counting how many you did. Resolving them is important, counting how many you did is important, but it would be really hard to make that shift. So that's a big, important cultural difference. And I think those two things kind of meet on this idea on the IT side, which I think maybe they borrowed from security, this idea of shifting left, this idea of moving the resolution closer to the problem. So in the IT help desk, you're looking to, I want to reduce the number of escalations that, have one person solve it rather than a team of 3 people solve it. Get self-service involved. So the individual who raises the problem is actually able to take the steps that resolve the problem. Or most importantly, I think putting automation in place. And particularly with intelligent automation, you start to see this focus on preventative measures that are going to stop the problems before they show up. And then that starts to bring those IT and security perspectives into much better alignment than they were before, because everyone can agree that the best incident or the best problem is the one that never shows up. And I think that is the basis for a collaboration for IT and security, where they can look at their shared goals and they can say, yeah, we both want to prevent these incidents. We both want to prevent these problems from happening. So let's start looking at what the common infrastructure is, what's the common data set that's going to enable that better collaboration between the two. Start speaking the same language, start looking at the same metrics, start looking at common goals that are going to align those efforts. And ultimately that is going to lead to a focus on operational efficiency that's going to do more than just count the number of problems, but it's going to say what preventative measures are we putting in place? How have we stopped things from arising? How have we reduced the overall number of incidents? And even then, we might not reduce the overall number of tickets, because on the IT side, we'll go ahead and generate a ticket when we prevent something too, right? So the number of tickets may actually go up. It may stay fixed. But the more we involve automation, and the more we move the resolution closer to the problem, the closer IT and security get together conceptually, culturally, and with the right infrastructure in place in a really practical sense too. So I think this burnout problem actually raises one of the best opportunities for IT and security to work closer and better together. At least that is my highly optimistic take on it. I don't know, Marika, maybe you can bring us back down to earth with some additional facts.
No, I definitely agree with all of that, what you said. And I would like to add kind of the end user as part of that equation as well, kind of extending view of IT and security, but you're also adding the end user's perspective. But starting with the analysts, definitely agree with everything you were saying here. Your task, right, in the service desk with improving issue resolution. And like you were just talking about, the best problem is the one you don't even know you had, that is already kind of solved. And I'm going to say it here, our favorite buzzword of these days, AI and automation, right? It's really critical here for IT and security teams to kind of accelerate that issue resolution and avoid that impact, that issues actually become incidents or problems in the first place that the help desk has to worry about. And using definitely those real-time insights, AI for ticket classification, knowledge management, all of that will definitely help improve remediation times and also accelerate the resolution of those help desk issues if you can automate and kind of the troubleshooting aspect, the remediation, and avoid those costly escalation that you talked about with shifting left. So all around helping really do that preventative maintenance. But what I would like to add is on the end user side, right? That although the data shows, like you were saying, that remote work or hybrid work is increasing the help desk volumes, I also want to highlight that many of the other issues don't even ever make it to the help desk at all. There's a lot of digital friction, right? That multiple times all of us here kind of each month kind of experience slow network, maybe poor device performance, applications not running, blue screen, everything that could maybe impact our downtime. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't actually often report that back to the IT help desk necessarily. So I try to struggle through on and off, log on and off. Let's see if it works and if it kind of streamlines reboot my machine. So how can the IT help desk then really improve on their resolution, on their approach to better serve their whole users when they actually don't know about these issues in the first place? So we've done a study recently about measurement about the experience that users have with the technology they're using to work every day. And we found out that 50% of the respondents actually admitted that they are not tracking any type of experience metrics. So they're not looking at how are devices and applications performing on a regular basis and what is the trend, where are productivity kind of degradations, what are my device analytics looking like, what is actually the speed of my ticket resolution, and kind of also linking that to customer satisfaction scores, or even looking at broader scoring mechanisms of the digital experience. So here I really see an opportunity focusing on the user for IT and security teams to really collaborate and come together and agree on these metrics that you want to kind of track, and build a continuous improvement plan there, right? Because if you're really missing those critical insights into your devices and your security issues that can impact your overall organization from a productivity and experience perspective. And for me, I really think without measuring where you are at and understanding kind of your baseline, it's going to be really hard to understand what that experience of your users is in reality. And once you have that baseline and have that understanding, then you can really start improving and look at goals around operational efficiency and kind of easing that burden on the help desk. So that would be kind of my perspective on where to start here for IT and security.
That's a great perspective, Marika. And I think that, both you and Phil hit on the, importance of harnessing automation, harnessing the ability to be proactive rather than reactive. And, our ability to start to learn behavior within devices through telemetry and other things that can actually be actioned beforehand versus for actually waiting for that blue screen to happen. It's so important. And it absolutely, I think, as Phil said, is still captured within the help desk, so that there's the ability to look at how much time is actually being saved through automation using, that proactive remediation versus downtime that subsequently might happen from it. So I think it really provides the ability for more visibility, ultimately driving a better experience long term. All right, well, let's head on to the next topic. All right, we're going to talk now about data silos. And data silos are something that I think, all organizations that we speak to, our customers, non-customers, organizations in every industry, in every region, have challenges with having data that sits apart from each other. And when you are trying to make aligned decisions, and especially as Rob said earlier, from that, more senior level where we're trying to come to an agreement on acceptability of risk and how we're actually going to manage and measure that, knowing and having visibility around all of the data so that you're actually making very informed decisions is so critical. So I think, Rob, my first question to you is, what can IT and security teams do to actually reduce those silos and bring visibility to the data so that the appropriate actions can actually be taken?
Yeah, so definitely data silos, real big headache for organizations, I think, across the board. And, to answer your question, one of the biggest issues is that it makes it really hard with data silos to see, what's the full picture on what your risk exposure is, one. And then the other is, how do you measure how effective your work is, whether it's in security or IT? So, we've tried to demonstrate the value of cybersecurity products, but it's been challenging as each cyber category solves for a very specific problem, and it doesn't address the higher order trade-offs in investment and in what it actually achieves. So, I mentioned earlier that not all assets are created equal earlier. Well, from a similar perspective, neither are all workflows. So there's going to be, if you look at the handoff between security and IT, and it's coming across as unprioritized, maybe it's prioritized from an individual attack surface asset perspective, but there is no bigger picture of, well, what do I really need to be protecting first? So imagine this. You have a medium risk vulnerability on one facet of your attack surface. And that may actually be, as a medium, more urgent to fix than what otherwise might be deemed a critical vulnerability, but on a less critical asset. So this leaves IT in a tough spot, right? You're trying to do a ton of work, but you're not doing it with any context in order to prioritize from an IT workflow perspective, or just as importantly, and we saw this in the survey, the ability to judge whether their efforts are making a real dent in the organization's risk exposure. So if you can't do that, how do you justify asks for product? How do you justify asks for more people to actually do the work if you cannot express how valuable that work is? So along comes exposure management, which is it's getting traction, and it tries to address this by taking a more comprehensive view of cyber risk. So it's helping organizations make data-driven decisions on what to tackle first from a vulnerability perspective and what risks matter the most. And by being able to directly measure the effectiveness, the efficacy of efforts, the promise is that it's going to allow organizations to fine-tune and prioritize workflows, which is going to, I think, really help in budget cycles, for example, and being able to understand where you need to put investment. Is it people? Is it process? Is it product? And it'll make that a lot clearer. And by doing this, you end up with a closed loop system, and it's going to make it, I think, easier to set and achieve a shared set of goals across the different functions, because you're going to understand, if you're in IT, why am I getting certain risks prioritized for me to mitigate through whatever the action is. And you create that closed loop system, which will also help make it really easy to understand for executives why work's being done. So you're not just summoning a CISO to give you their perspective on how things are. You're looking at it continuously. This is all based on CTEM, a Gartner phenomenon that gives you a framework to look at this continuously. And that's the goal here. It's not set and forget. You're looking at this constantly. So it's going to be a game changer for managing risk and page. In the last comment I'd make about this is that the good news is that it's not going to involve a rip and replace. This is unusual, I think, in the cyberspace. So instead, it's an aggregation play of what's out there today that's currently siloed, pulling it all together. It's an aggregation of all that data into meaningful information that allow you to make better decisions on what actions to take. So it becomes actionable, and ultimately for workflows that are well known, that solve well-known problems, that's where automation comes into it, and that's going to free up a lot of manual work, and folks will instead be able to refine and elevate an organization's cyber strategy instead of just doing busy work. So it's going to elevate everyone's role as well, I think.
I think, again, you bring a really interesting perspective to the conversation, because it continues to be around risk and exposure and what's acceptable, and how are objectives and decisions set for the organization as a whole based on that. I think, the going back to the issue of data silos, I'd love to get Phil's perspective as well on, once you've made those decisions and you've agreed that you're managing to this, how is it that we're going to go about, bringing the right data to the people that actually need to make those decisions and have the visibility around it?
Yeah, well, I think that the question of the right data, that's really where it starts. And I think you have to kind of step back and you have to look at the root causes for data silos. You have to understand a little bit about how they came to exist, because nobody sets out to have everything fragmented. That's not ever the goal to begin with. But what you end up with is you end up with these different pools of data. You end up with these different applications, and things aren't talking to each other. You're not looking at a complete picture. That came about not because we were trying to fragment. It came about because there was a certain amount of value in having this pile over here, or having this separate system over here, and there was a certain amount over here. It's kind of like since we're talking about data silos, we can talk about all the big major problems that IT shops have faced over the decades, and that's shadow IT, right? It's a little bit like that. When shadow IT gets implemented, it's because there's good things that somebody in the organization needs to do, and they're not seeing it coming out of IT the way they would have hoped for. When we have data silos because there are things that folks are trying to get done. There's data that needs to be in place, and they're using them for good ends. The problem is, of course, everything that Rob just talked about, all of the operational inefficiencies, all of the security risks, all of the troubles that you're bringing on yourself by not bringing it together. But I think the beginning of dealing with them is recognizing that what we want to do is we want to solve them not by cutting the silos down, but by bringing them together, by bringing that information together, bring that capability together. And there's a lot that can be done around technology. Rob talked about some really exciting stuff that's coming there. We think in terms on the IT side about integrating data. We think about getting it synchronized, getting different parts of the organization to talk to each other, having consistent data updates across platforms, or getting everything on a single platform, ultimately getting everything into what you can view as a single source of truth that is supporting all of the different applications, all the different functions, all the different processes. And that is about half the battle, right? Because I'm gonna swing it back again and talk about the fact that you've still got these, I think, embedded cultural differences between IT and security. You've got process issues between those, and you've really got to get people working cross-functionally. You've got to get out of a handoff mentality and into it. At Ivanti, we have this idea. We talk about locking arms, and I think there's actually an aspect of that has to come into play when you're bringing all of these different pieces of data and all these different pieces of functionality together. It's not just about handoffs anymore. It's about actually bringing it all together so that it becomes one source of data. It becomes one set of capabilities that are supporting all the different processes that need to be carried out. So you do that, and then you're going to get the visibility that you need. You're going to have processes aligning, and you're going to be able to meet your bigger objectives. Important also is, I think, this idea of data governance that we don't talk about as much these days as we have in the past, as we've made this move to the cloud. But the idea is still really critical that you've got to have the right policies, you got to have the right guidelines in place, all the rules around accessing data, copying it, using it, sharing it, making sure that you're complying not only with the policies that you put in place, but that with whatever regulatory policies, whatever legal policies are in place, and that you're monitoring this and that you're auditing it. Because the other reason that silos happen is because you just lose track of where the data is or who's using it, or a new approach develops and suddenly it becomes a little world unto itself. So you got to put the governance in place, you've got to get you've got to go beyond handoffs and get to a place of locking arms. And ultimately, you got to have the technology in place that's going to support that. And I think at the end of the day, what you want is a single platform that is supporting your IT processes as well as your security processes, and a single source of data that's making all the stuff that Rob was talking about possible.
I think that was a perfect lead-in to our next topic. So thank you for making that transition for me. So let's now wrap things up with the last question that we want to talk about today is, so, we've talked about the data silos. We've talked about the challenges of managing efficiency and productivity within security teams, as well as making sure that we have the best practices in place and we're managing to an acceptable level of risk. So all that being said, what are some additional things that IT and security leaders can do to ensure that efficiency and productivity without sacrificing security? And Marika, I want to start with you to take us home on this last question here.
Yeah, I mean, we've addressed it, I think, throughout the session today. There is still this tug of war, right? We've always keep hearing that. It's on one hand, ensuring the environment is protected, providing secure access to employees to get their work done. On one side, pulling that direction, going more to lockdown, versus employees like all of us here who want to have the flexibility to really work from anywhere and be productive on any device, which with not necessarily thinking about the security aspect, right? We want to get our work done. We want to be productive. We don't want to talk about, okay, what are the security guidelines or governance rules that I need to actually comply to, even though that is very critical so that we can safeguard our information and close our security gaps and be protected against all the cyber security threats and exposures that we've talked about today as well. So, and again, while it might be easy for IT to say, well, let's lock everything down so that it's all protected, well, it's not feasible, right? For today's workforce, and especially also different generational kind of needs of how to work, where to work, how to kind of be productive nowadays, we need to be empowering our users, empowering our employees to get their work done. And that's critical from a differentiation perspective, even more as well for organizations. So what can we do, right? It's going to be about being proactive in the security measures that you are going to apply, that users don't really see them, that they are not constricted and having to go through complex and reactive kind of workarounds to complete their daily task. And we've seen that often, right? That even the CISO or C-level have circumvented a security protocol in favor of productivity, and over again, kind of exposing us. So IT and security leaders should really consider taking an security first, security by design approach, embed the security into the processes and tools the users are working every day in a way that keeps them protected, right, in the background and doesn't impact their productivity. And that will kind of allow the IT and security teams to have kind of management control, security control over the environment and mitigate any risks and exposures before they impact the end users. But again, that's easier said than done. So how do we actually get there? And I do think a big part of that is for IT and security teams, and Phil just mentioned it, to lock arms, to really align on their priorities. And we've seen now in this year for the first time, and this is data according to Gartner, IT teams and security teams have started to kind of lock arms on operational efficiency and productivity kind of goals, which definitely will help with the discussion on the experience that we've talked about, the digital friction and so on. But they have not fully aligned on actually managing and mitigating risk, which is very critical in today's environment. So I do see that convergence of priorities with IT and security as being very important in this discussion, but there's a lot of challenges still in our way to really enabling and driving that true collaboration. And I do believe, similar as Phil is saying, that yes, technology is one side, process is the other. The people is always very critical as well. And we do need to work collectively, trying to work on improving those overall kind of business outcomes. And sometimes that really entails going back to basics, taking a step back, really talking about what are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? What are kind of our objectives and our path to get there? What milestones and check-ins are we going to put in place? And what are our plans and measurements and KPIs we're going to look at together, and really kind of bringing both perspectives from IT operations and security into those plans, and going through that process. And it will take some time. I mean, nothing good comes easy, right? But I do think that's an important work and critical for organizations to move forward, to be competitive, and to create impact and better business outcomes overall. So that's, I think, from my perspective, how organizations can manage that. But locking arms, definitely, I would sign that as well, that it is a critical part of moving us forward.
That's great. I love that both you and Phil talked about one of Ivanti's core values overall, and that is, locking arms, making sure that we are working together and in alignment to, deliver value both within our organization and for our customers. So thanks for bringing that in. Before I want to, provide, I want to get in Helika's perspective. We haven't heard from you for the last couple of questions, and so it'd be great to hear what you think about this in closing out this last question, and then we'll wrap up and address any questions we have from the audience as well.
Thanks, Karina. Yeah, this is a really interesting one to me. Balancing sort of that flexibility, productivity, and security is sort of the age-old challenge for every organization here. And if folks haven't read the report, it said something like 40% of employees said they would actually change their job if it meant more flexibility for them. So it's obviously a critical aspect from a business perspective to make sure that we can continue to enable employees to work effectively, but also securely to minimize risks to the business. And this whole concept of locking arms that, Phil and Marika have shared, it really resonates with me, because by having IT and security leaders work together, there are opportunities and benefits and advantages to that. Like, for example, right, I put my network security hat on, right, but implementing solutions and aligning sort of that strategic objectives, not only desired business outcomes, but desired security outcomes and desired IT outcomes. Collectively, they can implement solutions that improve visibility, for example, right? Providing that kind of comprehensive view of the environment via a single pane of glass. The advantages for the IT and security team are endless. It provides them access, visibility, data and analytics, like we talked about earlier in the conversation today, right? So they can take that more proactive approach to shifting left and anticipating whatever potential risk could be introduced as a result of some of the employees' behaviors. I also think the concepts of integrating strategies around kind of that continuous risk adaptive type approach, right, is going to be beneficial to both those IT and security teams, not only just from a device posture management for your users, but also just ensuring that you have sort of the safe policies that roll across both the IT and security teams in terms of how they manage and control employee access overall. Lastly, I would say, zero trust is near and dear to my heart, just, by the nature of my role here, but there's a lot of opportunities to look at leveraging that type of zero trust architecture for that continuous, analysis and verification of employees or even guests. For some of the folks who have, contractors that they're working with to networks and applications. All that to say, organizations don't have to sacrifice security for the sake of productivity. It's not one or the other. There are absolutely opportunities here for those two teams to collaborate so they can actually benefit from the advantages of implementing solutions, business strategies that will allow them to meet their business objectives, but also making sure that the employees stay with a positive employee experience overall.
Thanks, Angelica. Well, I love the conversation that you all bring. And every time I hear you speak about, everywhere work or hybrid work and the impact to the organizations that we work with day in and day out, namely being IT and security, I walk away feeling like I've learned something as well. So I certainly hope that's the case for our attendees and our audience today. With that, we have just time for two questions, and I'm going to start with one that came in that we hit on very early in the conversation, but they asked if we could expand on how we think that alignment between IT and security is actually going to help retain talent, especially in the, we talked about burnout. So I think, Phil, it would be great to start with you and get your perspective on, how does this actually help us retain the employees we want to retain?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways. If we're talking about the organization overall, if you're working for a more secure organization, if you're working for a more productive organization, that's a better place to work. And there's already a big boost in working towards better retention of talent. So if you're talking about just everybody in the organization, I think this is a thing that makes it a better place to work. You feel better about the work that you're doing because you're part of a productive organization. You're not looking over your shoulder all the time because of the security problems. So from a straight up staffing standpoint, it's a better place to work. I think from both an IT and a security standpoint, you're gonna retain that talent a lot more effectively as well, because we're rapidly moving in a direction where those two functions are merging. I mean, a lot of what we've talked about here today is how there's a set of common interests, there's a set of common concerns, and ultimately, I think there's a step forward that has a lot of common steps that these two groups have to be taking together. So if you've got them working together well, you're going to have a much more effective and productive IT team. You're going to have a more effective IT operations, and you're going to have a much more effective and productive security team. They're going to be actually getting done the things that they want to get done. They're going to be looking to the future. They're going to be looking to what they can do next. And I think all of that is going to be really beneficial towards keeping them where you want them.
Thanks, Phil. I think so. So you're really saying that there's both the benefit to retaining employees at large because of the tools, the resources, the connectivity that you make available to them, and then there is also a benefit to the actual, IT and security workers who feel like they're in it together versus, let's say, security ops identifying a problem and just throwing it over the wall to IT ops and saying, "Here you go, now you figure it out." So, I love that. Again, the back to the locking arms, they're in it together, but ultimately if it helps retain the employees that we have, then I think that's another positive outcome of this overall move to alignment.
Everything works better when everything works together. That's what it comes down to. Yeah,
it absolutely does. The last question we got is a handful, and I don't know that we're going to do it justice in the time that we actually have here, but very quickly, we got asked a question around Gen AI. They said we touched on IT and automation and AI in general, yes, but we didn't touch on Gen AI and its place in hybrid work and impact there. And so I'd like to throw that out to Rob and get your perspective, if you've got a very short perspective on that question.
Well, it's a loaded topic, but I think you get to divide AI into two categories: as the generative and the agentic side, which we would otherwise call automation. And I think the biggest value we're going to get is out of the agentic. So going what I was saying earlier about if you can take some of your workflows and make them so rote that they can be automated with little to no oversight, that's a huge win. Because going to your other question, that means you're elevating everyone's job description because they're not doing boring work. That's where you tend to make mistakes, right? Is if you're doing boring work. So it also should help just in that perspective. On the Gen AI side, I think you're going to see more on the attacker side of things than on the defense side of things, but it's still early. It's still very early. So that I think is a work yet to be written on the Gen AI side.
Sounds like a whole other webinar roundtable topic that we could spend at least an hour discussing.
Sure could.
Well, with that, we've come to the end of our hour, and I want to thank all of our attendees for being here today. I hope you found this discussion helpful, informative. Again, I urge you to check out the report itself. and the resources that we've provided in the docs link for you. And with that, I'll say goodbye and look forward to seeing you at another time. Thanks, everybody.